Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There seems to be a lot of confusion going on the other side of the House. Firstly, Yuri stood up and talked for an entire 7 minutes about Hitler and Stalin, and he also mentioned that he will not forbid historians to talk about Truman, who was responsible for some killing. Secondly, Yoni stood up and said, well, we are not going to prosecute people who talk good about not convicted people, being Hitler, Stalin, and Truman. We are only going to talk about people who talk about people who are convicted. Then the second side, the second proposition mentioned, that we don't care about whether you are convicted or not, as long as the psychological, as long as if there is a certain psychological harm, then we are going to forbid you to speak in a certain way about certain people. This undermines the freedom of expression in a very bad sense. It will all say to historians, you are not able to talk about anything which might lead to some people being hurt. We will not look to the intention and the context in which the book or the opinion is written, but we will only say some people take offense of it, so you are not allowed to write it, and we don't think that that has been justified by their side of the House. Firstly, because they have failed to establish a harm, a real harm, and secondly, because their policy undermines us to draw a good conclusion from what happened from atrocities that happened in the past, and it undermines public discourse. Okay. Yuri said very boldly, it will bring problems into society. Well, we don't see how, if a Western historian, for instance, talked about the atrocities in Sudan, that will lead to their problems that are happening, problems which you might compare to inciting violence. But then they said, well, historians who in that post-war society talk very good about certain convicted dictators, these people should be convicted because they incite to violence, and because that would lead to tension there. Well, first we say, how is a trial going to lessen the attention which these historians will get? Isn't the trial always centralized about the opinions of that person? And wouldn't that minority, feel undermined and suppressed by the majority who is convicting them because only they have won? Because that's what happens in post-war society. The winners take the losers to be convicted. Yes.
Basically, your extension says Truman should have been convicted too. Fine, that doesn't mean that glorifying convicted war criminals is good. And we say whoever had been convicted should not be glorified.
No. What we are saying that if you allow people to say everything which might lead to a psychological harm must lead to it being forbidden, then that would minimize the freedom of speech, and that would undermine the historians in their role. Okay, they somehow assume that if 10% thinks a certain way, that the other 90% will lead to that. They have a great distrust in the public discourse. And what we say, why are you assuming that? In most Western liberal democracies, and in almost all democracies, we assume that you can convince people and that you can reason with people. Why do you think that a certain minority, by being oppressed or by voting, by telling what they think, will? Yes.
If that were true, there would be no prejudice, no racism at all.
No, prejudice and racism are a part of public discourse, and they disappear once you can have a sensible debate about them. They will not automatically lead to violence. That's what you are asserting, and that's what we are saying that will not happen. Okay. What their policy does is saying, okay, these people are bad. They are not a part of humanity. They say only evil people and not normal people can do these kind of wrong things. And we are and on our side of the house, we say that if you do that, people will not draw conclusions. They will not see that everybody is able to do wrong things given a certain position and given a certain time. Saying that Hitler sometimes was nice to his dog and sometimes was a nice person to some people does not mean that you are saying his acts were good or what he did was good, But it just says that he's like other people. Like other people, he had some bad. He also did some good things, but he had also bad things which we condemn in our modern society. So we don't think that your logic flows. Then Rob pointed out that in post-conflict societies, we usually can see that the winner is the person who is the side which convicts other people. We say you are going to be, and especially in post-conflict society, need a public discourse, a certain evaluation about what happened in that society. We think that having that discussion about what happened and not having a one-sided discussion, wherein one side says the other side is bad and you should talk about your leaders, but we are going to say that our leaders are good, we don't think that that will enhance the political discourse in a post-conflict society. We think that it's probable that will lead to a society in which there are more tensions, in which the attention is only about the trials that happen, and in which leaders are convicted, and in which people are being told, you can't talk about your past, you can't talk about your former political leaders, you can't talk about your former leaders in a good sense, you can't say that some things were good about your policy. You only tell them, we are going to have a one-sided debate in which our side dominates, in which our side is the good side, and in which the other side is the bad side. That's what happens, and that's what actually leads to tensions. Not people expressing their view on what was good in their society and what was good about their leaders. So we think that they have made a lot of assumptions and they have failed to establish a certain harm. They have failed to tell us why this would lead to a good policy, and I beg you to oppose.
I'd like to thank all 8 speakers for a very interesting and thought-provoking debate. I think the audience should again show their